Hey everyone, it's Nikki. Welcome or welcome back. I found this mailbox at Hobby Lobby last year, 90% off, and I couldn't pass it up. So I painted it with a clay-based paint. It's by Mud Paint and the color Simply White. I mixed it in with some salt wash. I want this to have a textured look to it, and I mixed that up real good and just went right in and began stippling and brushing. On this day, I was batch casting some mold, so I am so sorry. I don't remember the name of this mold. I do have one similar called a Claire mold and an lighting etchings, but I think this is quite similar to my Claire mold, and it's just a bit smaller. I am so sorry. If I can figure it out, I will link that down below for you. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I had to take my sister to work, and by the time I got back, my casting had already hardened. So I grabbed my embossing gun and started to heat it up a little bit to make it malleable again so it would wrap around and curve around my mailbox. And this is a really good trick to know, especially if you like to batch cast and set those aside for later. You can always warm them up with your embossing gun so that way you can mold them around things like this. I used some Gorilla Glue gel and some hot glue to adhere my casting. And when I first set it down, I was like, ooh, I'm getting a little bit too close because I want to close my mailbox. I don't want it to stay open. And so I was able to slide it back, and then I just had to go in again with my hot glue and just lift up a few areas and glue them down. I just want to take a moment and thank you for stopping by my channel. If you're new here, I really hope that you're enjoying this so far. And if you haven't worked with molds before, I hope today gives you a little inspiration to give them a try. And if you're returning, thank you so much for continuing to watch my videos and support me. I'm still working hard towards my goal of reaching 1,000 subscribers. It has been quite a journey, and I'd love to have your support along the way. So thank you for being here with me today. I got this beautiful napkin from decoupagenapkins.com, I believe, and I took another casting, and at first I was going to put it here on the side of my mailbox, but then I decided to put it on the front. So I'm going to tear it to fit my casting. I just love seeing his little face, and he's looking at that bear saying, shh, be quiet. Don't wake anybody up. I'm going to use a little liquid patina to adhere it. I'm going to set my image right down into it and then brush a little liquid patina over it. It is a little off center, but that's okay. Once I add my frame, you won't even notice it. If you have some wrinkles, you can take a little bit of cling wrap and just ball it up and smooth out those wrinkles. And I took a little hot glue, and that's what I used to adhere my frame down to my mailbox. And then I went over it again with more liquid patina, and then I took that liquid patina and went all the way around my box just to seal everything in. I took the same paint, which was the Simply White clay-based paint, and painted both of my castings, but I don't show me painting all of them. And then I took Crackle Medium Step 1 by Paint Couture, and I painted over my image and then just over the front. Then I took this rice paper. It's a pretty vintage postal image, and added some more liquid patina and set that image right down into it, and then went over the top with more patina. And after about 30 minutes, I went in with Crackle Step 2 and just made sure I spread that all around. And then I went in a crosshatch motion and then set that off to dry. Then I took this texture paste. It's by Tim Holtz, And this stencil, I believe I got on Amazon and just spread that all over. And this is going to look a little patchy. I don't want it to be perfect. I want it, to be little here and there. That way it looks a little weathered and old. This stuff is a lot of fun to work with, and just so you know that you could also use it in place of snow. I've seen people do that as well, and it still looks very nice. Once my medium was dry, probably about 30 minutes, it was real quick while I was adding on the faux bricks, but I went in with some Van Dyke Brown by Paint Couture and just worked that into all the little cracks with a paintbrush and then pulled some of it back with a baby wipe. And you could totally skip this step. I always tell people you could totally skip this step. I know a lot of people do not like crackle, but I do because I like that old world look. I like things to look like you just pulled them out of an old house or an old Victorian building or what have you. I just want them to look old. And then I brought that glaze all around my frame, working it into those low points and then pulling them back using my baby wipe. And that crackle that I brought around the front, I'm working that into that crackle as well. And then bringing it up into my top mold, again, working that into the low points. And then, just using my paintbrush to work some of it around. Because once the baby wipe releases some of the water that's in them, or I don't know what they put in them, but it does get into those low points, and then I can take my paintbrush and just move that around a little bit more. When I was finished with that, I took my Extreme Guard Satin by Paint Couture and then went over everything. And so a happy accident, my brush hit some of that glaze and brought it into my bricks and stuff. So I really liked how that looked. So I poured a little bit of that Van Dyke brown glaze, and then I just worked it in with my Extreme Guard Satin and went over all of my mailbox, and I really like how that looked. That added that extra old look that I really needed and distressed it nicely. And then these castings I had cast earlier, I wanted to add to, what do you call that part of the mailbox? Um, like the little flag, maybe it's just called a flag. And I added them to the flag. Right where I put that bow, there was like a crack in my flag. And so I covered that up and then added this other one down to the lower part. And I think that looks very nice. Then I took out Paint Couture's bronze metallic paint and I'm going over all those high points, highlighting them, and I just love this gold. It's so pretty and it really elevates a project, especially when you're going for that old Victorian look. It's very nice. But of course, if you do not like gold, which I know a lot of people don't, you could totally skip that step. It does look beautiful alone with just the Van Dyke Brown sitting in those low points and bringing that casting to life. And of course, I brought that same gold right into the front over that frame. And to add a little bit of extra gold, I used some rub and buff and my finger and just blended that all around the high points. It wasn't quite enough gold. I wanted to add a little more depth to this. So I grabbed some rub and buff and just blended that in with my finger. I'm just loving all these gold tones. They're so lovely and they add that bit of French charm, kind of soft and elegant and timeless. And I think there's something about them that feels classic and romantic, almost like that effortless French flair that never goes out of style, in my opinion, anyway. I then finished off my image with some glossy Mod Podge. All right, the back of my mailbox looks like something is missing, so I took out my primitive mold and I'm going to cast this little border along the bottom of my mold, just adding a little bit of uh, cornstarch and then pressing my clay down into my mold and then flexing it, releasing it, and then using a little bit of tight bond quick and thick to adhere my castings. And then I took the color plaster and that's what I'm using to paint them. And then I took more of that Van Dyke brown and a paintbrush, again, working it into the low points and then using my water mister to move that glaze around and using my baby wipe to pull some of that back. That was my husband who sneezed, by the way, and I'm not going to redo this part of the voiceover. Okay, and then I decided to bring that Van Dyke Brown back in one more time. I feel like it kind of got lost in the background there, and the gold was just kind of screaming in the front. So just tone that down a little bit, and I'm really glad that I didn't skip this step because it really did make a difference. And I think this is looking absolutely beautiful. And of course, I hit those high points with more of that bronze metallic paint. And that finished that off. Then I took one of IOD's stamps from the recent release and added that right to the top of my flag using IOD's black ink. And I think that was a perfect addition. I heat set that and then distressed a little bit around the flag. And I just used the same paintbrush that I had used earlier with that Van Dyke brown on it and then just went over some areas. And that is it. I think this is the sweetest little mailbox. You'll have to let me know what you think of this. If you stayed for the whole video, I appreciate you being here and watching till the end. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. Until the next one, bye.